I never imagined that the very first milestone of life would bury me so quickly under the weight of such enormous responsibilities. For as long as I was confined within the four walls of my matriculation, my whole world revolved around my school bag, my slate, and the school courtyard. In our small neighborhood, stories of my father's strength echoed every evening like an old radio. Nothing ever truly new, but always with the same commanding tone that, since my childhood, had taught me that real respect is earned by sweating on a handful of sand. But I, on the other hand, found my pride in the ink of books. The dream of a stomach that could digest 10 rotis and a glass of lassi never appealed to me. My father knew this well, which is why every morning after Fajr, he would brush off the wrestling pit's earth from his body, come to my bedside, gently run his hand over my head, and quietly say, "Son, one day you'll go far with your education, but remember, never break your bond with the soil." I had no idea that the days ahead would test me with the hardest trial of that very soil. When I took the final exam of my intermediate year, I only had enough money in my pocket to get back home. My mother suffered from diabetes, and every morning her other hand would tremble. My father's wrestling pit was now deserted. His students were gone, replaced by the shiny new gyms opening all over the city. One morning, I watched him silently untie his loincloth by the old dais, take a heavy breath, and sit down on the mud, his hands folded together. It was as if he was locking the door to his own kingdom from the inside. Watching this scene, I walked out onto the street and decided I would have to work hard alongside my studies to support my family. My matric teacher used his family ties to get me a job at a nearby cloth shop. The salary was small, but when I would bring it home in the evening and place it in my mother's hand, her eyes would well up with tears. My father never touched that little bit of money. He used to say, "You are the lamp of this house. I won't wash my hands in your oil. I'll just pray this lamp never goes out." After just 6 months, I received my first raise, 5,000 rupees a month. For my mother, this news was brighter than any Eid. The very next Thursday, she went to visit her old friend Zubaida Kala and returned with news that she'd hinted at fixing Najma's hand for me. That evening, while the lentils simmered on the stove, Amma adjusted her dupatta and quietly asked, "Shahide, are you hiding any preferences of your own?" I took a sip of water, smiled sheepishly, and said, "Amma, your choice is my choice." Hearing this, she raised her hands in prayer, and for the first time, I saw a gleaming pride in my father's eyes, as if my agreement had finally lightened his burden. The news of my wedding spread through the house like the beat of a dolak. The first time I spoke to Najma on the phone, I felt as if I were standing on the shore of some unfamiliar sea, words washing over me like waves, but my feet sinking into the sand. She laughed with a silvery chime and asked what my hobbies were. I replied simply at books and Amma's smile. She went silent for a few seconds, then said, "And physical strength?" I laughed and said, "That's my father's department." She teased, "So can you lift as much weight as wrestlers do?" Using the sound of a passing rickshaw outside my window as an excuse, I changed the subject. That night, I lay awake wondering why girls might be so interested in strength, but shook my head and decided she was probably just joking. When I slipped the engagement ring on her finger, I looked into her eyes for the first time. She looked away, smiling softly, and whispered, "I thought you'd be like your father, but it seems I was looking at the wrong picture." My hands trembled from shyness as I slid on the ring, but I kept a smile on my lips. When my hand trembled at the time of farewell, she gently squeezed my finger and whispered, "Weakness isn't a bad thing, but strength is a beautiful thing too, isn't it?" Laughing, I replied, "Strength is in the heart, not in the hands and feet." She gave me a meaningful look but said nothing. I convinced myself that all of this was just playful teasing from a newly engaged girl. Time kept dissolving between the shop and home, but as soon as I would climb over the back wall in the silence of night, words would begin to smolder between us. When I spoke about hard work and plans for the future, she would interject in the middle, "Have you ever thought about building your body?" I would laugh and look at the curtains, saying, "My earnings come not from physical exercise, but from the race of the mind." She would press her lips together and smile, as if she'd failed to solve some riddle. One night she spoke plainly, "Shahid, if you can't be like your father, at least do some basic exercise. A girl needs support, not just poetry." Something sharp pricked inside my chest. I thought to myself that I couldn't bear it if she ever repeated these words in front of my father. Outwardly, though, I just patted her hand and let the matter drop. Time raced forward, and the day of the wedding finally arrived. The wedding lights, the band's pounding drums, and the bright red bridal lehenga. All of it felt like a dream. As my father smoothed down my sherwani, he leaned in and whispered, "Son, from today, you're the new wrestler of this house." I lowered my eyes and said, "Yes, Abba." But deep inside, I felt the same burden, that I had always run away from wrestling. Still, the happiness on Amma's face was enough to veil all my worries. When Najma became a bride, she truly looked like a piece of the moon, but there was a kind of thirst in her eyes that I dismissed as the exhaustion of the wedding. On our first night, when I brushed her hair back and hid her face, she whispered again, "Why don't you become like your father?" Waving away the candle's smoke, I replied with some irritation, "Is this the time for such things?" Suddenly, she fell silent, as if someone had sealed her lips. I silently rebuked myself, but let the matter pass, holding her close as we fell asleep. When the morning rays filtered into the room, I felt as if an invisible wall had risen between us. Just a week after the wedding, my routine began to change. I would leave for the shop in the morning, and when I returned, I'd see Najma sitting on the living room rug watching some sports channel on TV, while Amma managed the kitchen alone. One day, I gently suggested that she help Amma a little, but she replied spontaneously, "If the body is healthy, even the work of the in-laws can be done well, right?" Amma overheard and immediately responded with affection, saying, "She's still a child. She'll learn the ways of the house." I kept the matter to myself, but it was clear that the spark of wrestling still burned in Najma's heart. When Amma had to go to the village, I thought Najma would realize that a home can't be run by just watching sports and exercising, but the result was the opposite. She and Abba became like two peas in a pod. If Abba held the basket of naan, she would take care of the curry. While sweeping the courtyard, she'd compliment him, "Sir, your grip is still as strong as ever." Abba would smile and teach her a few old wrestling moves. Instead of being happy, I felt a strange irritation, but blamed myself for being jealous and kept quiet. Then came the night when I woke up suddenly and saw Najma tiptoeing out of Abba's room. My blood boiled. Without thinking, I grabbed her by the arm as I stood leaning against the wall. My eyes were wild, my breath was heaving. In a stinging tone, I said all the things I'd never even imagined before. Najma let out a muffled cry and stood frozen. Abba emerged and the room seemed to catch fire. His anger rained down on my face like lightning. That resounding slap shattered all my manhood. When Abba explained everything, I felt myself sinking into the quicksand of shame. He showed me the bag of herbs, dried fruits, preserves, and the tonic for strength that he drank daily. He explained that Najma had a secret passion for wrestling and had come to request these very things. Through tears, Najma shared her story. As a child, she was made to stand behind the boys, her hands tied at the tug-of-war field. It was in that moment she decided she would one day stand equal to, no, ahead of, the men. Her family tried to stop her. When our engagement was fixed, she thought I would be a wrestler like Abba, but she was disappointed. Her father-in-law gave her the courage that her own father hadn't, so she came to nurture her dream rather than suppress it. I looked at her with wet eyes. Shame sealed my tongue. I knelt down and kissed Abba's hands, then folded my hands before Najma. I told her she had every right to fulfill her dreams and that I would support her too. Abba's bow-like brows softened and he pulled me into an embrace. Perhaps for the first time, Najma grabbed me by the shoulder and drew me close. It felt as if someone had wrung all the pride out of me, leaving only courage behind. The very next day after this incident, I stood in the wrestling pit, clutching the rope with trembling hands. Abba, with a dusty shawl tied around his waist, was straightening my wrist while Najma ran circles around me, making sure I wouldn't get scared. My bones cracked, sand filled my shoes, pain shot through my ribs, but the first time I pulled the rope with all my strength, I felt a tiny surge of power welling up from deep within. It dawned on me that maybe, to become a wrestler, you first have to build the weight of your heart before your body. When I returned home, I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was drenched in sweat, my arms were caked with dust, and my eyes bore that fatigue you see in soldiers returning from war. Yet, within that tiredness, there was the glimmer of victory. I took a deep breath and remembered the line Najma had whispered to me on our wedding night. For the first time, I realized it hadn't been a taunt, but a hidden prayer. The next morning, Abba put before me a paratha stuffed with chickpeas and butter, and for the first time in my life, I ate 3 whole rotis. Najma clapped with delight and said, "If the body doesn't get enough fuel, how will it have the strength to compete?" Laughing, I took her hand. For the first time, I felt love even at the dining table. At the shop the next day, my colleagues started teasing me. One of the salesmen, seeing the bruises on my wrists, joked, "Oh, wrestler Sahib, how will you sell good cloth with hands like a cobbler's?" Smiling gently, I replied, "Even if my wrists are bruised, my heart is strong." He shrugged, but the customer, seeing my resolve, bought more cloth from me. I realized then that sometimes physical exhaustion can add to your personal magnetism, provided that the exhaustion is honest, born of true effort. That night, Najma and I were practicing new exercises in the wrestling pit when 2 boys from the neighborhood climbed the wall and began laughing. One shouted, "Now the weak groom will try wrestling!" My blood boiled, but Najma placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "For my sake, gather courage, not anger." I controlled myself and told the boys to come after Fajr the next morning. I would teach them tug of war. They laughed and jumped down, but to my surprise, they actually showed up the next day. With Abba's help, I taught them a few moves, and as they left, one of them sheepishly said, "Bhai, we misjudged you. Real respect is for those who work hard." My day was made golden. Gradually, word spread around the neighborhood that Shahid the wrestler's household now had a daughter-in-law who wrestled, and even the groom had entered the field. Some people respected us, while others concocted rumors and enjoyed the gossip. But those very same people would part their curtains in the evenings to peek out whenever they heard the sound of drums coming from the wrestling pit. There was nothing indecent in our efforts, just earth, sweat, and prayer. One day, Abba announced that in 10 days there would be a grand Sultani wrestling match, the old traditional exhibition bout that, in his time, used to be a festival. This time, he wanted Najma to compete in the women's friendly division, while I would enter the novice men's category. My legs trembled, but the conviction in his eyes was unshakable. I summoned my courage, crushed the cowardice hiding in my spine, and stood shoulder to shoulder with them. Najma smiled and touched my forehead as if gifting me the hem of her prayer. After Fajr, the 3 of us would run laps in the pit together. Even at 44, Abba seemed more agile than me. Najma would teach me the proper form, adjust the angle of my arms, and in return, I'd massage her fingers to relieve the friction. The exhaustion of our days sweetened our nights. We began to love each other in an entirely new way. There was a light of respect in my eyes for her, and on her lips a peaceful smile for me that I'd never seen before. On the day of the match, the sun was caught in a tangle of colorful flags. My greatest fear was having to wear the wrestling loincloth prepared for me. But when Najma tied my belt around my waist and filled her eyes with courage, saying, "Take the field like Abba," my fear vanished. At least, in my wife's eyes, I was no longer weak. As I stepped onto the sand, the earth greeted me, the very earth that had once felt like a burden, now pressed close to my heart. My first opponent wasn't an experienced wrestler, but there was a self-confidence in his legs that only years of practice can bring. Within a few rounds, I was out of breath. Then I remembered what Abba always said. To win a match, you must first win with your mind, not your body. I studied the angle of my opponent's shoulder, shifted my weight suddenly, and with one swift move, brought him crashing to the ground. The crowd roared, and Abba raised both hands and cried out, "Allahu Akbar!" All I could hear was Najma's applause. It felt as if I had conquered the whole world. Najma's match was held behind a curtain, but when news of her victory arrived, the drums in the whole festival hall beat faster. At first, the families of her opponents turned up their noses, but then their elders announced that victory belongs to the one who deserves it. Whether man or woman, sweat speaks the same. Hearing this, I felt as though we hadn't just won a wrestling match, but had broken a lock on people's minds. That night, when we returned home, Amma was back. She hugged my head to her side and kissed Najma's forehead. Abba lit the stick for the oil massage, filling the whole house with the fragrance of rose attar. Softly, I told Najma, "I always knew you would win." She laughed and replied, "And I always knew you would change." And then, For the first time, I saw my defeated ego joyfully kiss the feet of life. That same night, when everything was still, I promised Najma that from now on, I would see wrestling not just as Abba's past, but as my own future as well. She turned to me, her eyes glistening with both love and tears, and said, "That's why I told you from the start. Don't stay weak. I needed strong hands to walk beside me, so I built those hands, and you found your own foundation." Gently, I placed her hand over my heart. My heart was pounding, but in her touch, I found peace. Our new world had just begun to settle when some tongues in the neighborhood started wagging again. One old man said loudly outside the mosque, "If a daughter-in-law wrestles with her father-in-law, how will the next generations not lose all shame?" His words flew like an arrow through the air and echoed in my ears. I shuddered for a moment, but inside I was forged anew. That night, I told Abba everything, and he smiled and said, "Those with innocent hearts often speak nonsense. Reply with effort, not with words." A few days later, that same old man's granddaughter came to my cloth shop asking for a light chunri for her scarf. I showed her some colors, and she said shyly, "Brother, I heard you've built up your arms now?" I nodded, and she hesitated before saying, "Grandfather says women in the pit are a fitna, but I thought I'd like to see the wrestler daughter-in-law. Maybe I'll try running too." Her admission was like a lake of joy for me. I gave her the address of the pit and offered my prayers. When I told Najma at home, she threw her arms around my neck with delight and said, "See, real strength doesn't break things. It brings them together." That night became the seal of our first great victory. To celebrate that victory, Abba began building a small mud wrestling pit in a corner of the house so that the girls of the neighborhood could practice there. When I brought my first bonus home and paid for bricks and lime, Abba placed his hand on my head and said, "Son, you have upheld my honor." Najma joined her hands respectfully and said, "This is not just yours, it's ours." I felt as if the very walls of my house were filled with new breath. On the first Fajr of the mini pit, a gentle drizzle fell from the sky. I breathed in the scent of wet earth, and Najma raised her hands in prayer. Whoever can defeat their fear can defeat the world as well. In the end, Abba said just one thing. Wrestling is not just exercise for the body, it's a declaration of selfhood. Silently, I closed my eyes and gave thanks that the misunderstanding about 2 nights with the father-in-law had changed my life forever. This is where the fifth part of the journey ends. Najma, Abba, and I now stand in the same row, ready for the next wrestling match life throws at us. Sweat pulses in our veins like blood, and the scent of earth mixes with hope in our breath. I know there are more trials ahead, but now my heart is no longer weak. When the heart becomes a wrestler, the body naturally follows. And this is the very first lesson I learned from this remarkable woman and this great father. By nightfall, clouds had gathered, but the dampness of the humidity hung in the air like sticky, unfinished kisses. Sitting in the shadow of the pit's raw wall, I was repeating the day's exhausting moves when Najma quietly approached, stood behind me, and placed both her palms on my shoulders. Her round fingertips pressed into the scratched skin of my back, making me shiver. There was both concern and an unknown stubbornness in her touch. It was as if she wanted to weigh my strength in her own fist. I turned my head and saw a sliver of moonlight shining through the bushes, drawing a silver line on her cheek. In a heartbeat voice, she said, "Today, when you blocked that first attack with the kidney move, the whole crowd held its breath and watched you. Do you realize how strong you looked in that moment?" Hiding my mischievous smile, I replied, "You're the strong one, the one who dragged a weak-hearted man into the wrestling pit." She lifted her chin, traced a finger over the muscles in my arms, and whispered, "And for that heart, I am its heartbeat. Listen." She looked into my eyes and asked, "Do you have the courage to find me beautiful even when I'm wearing that heavy wrestling belt?" For a moment, I drew in a cool breath and gazed right into the courtyard of her eyelashes. "You'll look beautiful to me even when your face is streaked with sand and sweat from the pit." My answer seemed to electrify her. Leaning close to my ear, she laughed and whispered, "Then tomorrow night I'll show you the full glory of a woman wrestler, the way your Abba used to after a victory in his youth. The only difference is I'm yours. Only yours." Inside me, something cracked open and a river of passion swept everything away. With a pounding heart, I pulled her close. Our kiss melted into the dampness of the night. becoming a kind of new pact, bolder than anything our society had ever witnessed, and for us, the first time we united our breaths standing in the earth. In the background, the flickering flame of an oil lamp blended our shadows together. But that same candle, when it burns, also makes soot. The next morning, there was a letter wrapped in a green band at the pit's door. Beware, blood for honor can spill in an instant. A woman stripped and sweating in the ring is a disgrace. Back off or this soil will swallow your blood too. Abba read the letter, not with a sigh of regret, but with a clenched fist he slammed it into the sand. The dust that flew from his hand seemed to challenge the sky itself. Restless, I asked what we should do now. Abba glared and said, people who send cowardly threats in the darkness of night, let the sunlight answer them. Najma looked at me. For an instant, a shadow of fear trembled on her face, but the very next moment, unshakable resolve flashed in her eyes. The three of us decided, at the next grand festival where people would come from miles around, Najma would compete in the main match, and I would stand beside her in the ring. While I handled sales and accounting at the shop from 9 in the morning till 10 at night, every day before dawn, I trained in the pit with weights in my hands. Lines of pain deepened in my arms, but whenever exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, Najma would rub my aching muscles with her palms and say, if you lose, it's not just you, it's me, it's Abba. It's the dreams of our girls that lose. There was so much fire in her words that every hidden weakness in my bones would melt and pour out a sweat. 6 days were left when, passing by the cattle market, 2 masked men on a motorcycle suddenly turned and one hurled a brick at me. I ducked just in time. The brick smashed into the wall and shattered to pieces. They shouted, "Shameless husband! Don't you have any honor, letting your woman dance half naked in front of men?" I controlled my anger, brushed the dust off the broken brick, and yelled back, "My woman doesn't dance. She raises the banner of honor. If you have advice, give it to my face, not hiding like cowards." The motorcycle screeched away. That evening, I told Abba everything. In a deep, calm voice, he said, "It means we have struck our enemy's heart like an arrow. Congratulations. Now, victory in the ring is not just a game. It's a battle of ideas." That same night, Abba began the next phase of training, the blood vessel bursting Balbaru move. Najma went first, then me. Both of us collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, but our hands clung tightly to the rope, and at the other end of that rope, the whole of society was tied. For the first time, I felt not the false pride of my body, but the real soul of honor, the kind that teaches you to protect the weak, not to swagger over your strength. 3 nights before the match, Najma took out a red traditional scarf from her dowry chest. Sitting beside me, she softly said, "My mother wanted me to wear this on my wedding night, but I didn't. I want you to tie it around my waist, like a belt when I enter the ring. I want to step into the pit with your love wrapped around me." With trembling hands, I wound the scarf around her waist and tied a knot. The knot was so firm it felt like all the weak threads of our life had been woven into a single, strong belt. She breathed deeply with her eyes closed, whispering under her breath, "Yakawiyu Yamatin." I kissed her forehead and silently vowed that every move I made would honor not just myself, but the very breath that kept her alive. The day of the match arrived. Before sunrise, the clouds thundered as if 2 armies were gathering in the sky. People flocked from far and wide, skullcaps, turbans, women's painted hands, children's applause. On the eastern edge of the field was the old men's wrestling ring. On the western corner, a low but dignified marble slope for the women. In between, a barbed rope stood, dividing the 2 worlds, but the excited eyes, the tumultuous blue sky, and the heat of the earth made everyone witness to the same story. My match was first. Wearing my wrestling belt, I stood before Abba. He placed his hand on my chest and, in a loud, commanding voice, recited Surah al-Asr. When he reached Wadawasaw bil Haq, I felt as if fire had awakened in my lungs. The whistle blew. I circled my opponent for the first round. He was broader and more experienced than me. He tried 2 moves on me right away. His elbow struck my ribs and pain shot through me like lightning, but before I could collapse, Najma's voice echoed in my mind. "Courage never dies, it just falls asleep. Sometimes you have to pat it awake." I clenched my teeth, suddenly ducked and slid my right leg forward, twisted both arms inward around his waist. and in a flash he landed on his back, tasting the sand. The thunder of applause was no less than a lightning strike. Abba waved his shawl and raised the cry of prophethood. When I got up, my back pain was gone. Maybe the intoxication of victory had swallowed the pain. I brushed off the sand and walked to the side. From the women's section, the beat of drums rose. That meant Najma had stepped into the circle. I couldn't see behind the curtain, but I could hear the twang of the rope, the hum of compacted earth, muffled shrieks from the women, and whispered prayers on their lips. Suddenly, a sharp gasp pierced the air. My heart pounded like a hammer. I guessed Najma must have fallen. My feet moved forward on their own, but the boundary rope kept me back. 2 moments later, a long whistle sounded, the signal for victory. Then came a storm of applause from the women's section, so loud it felt like my eardrums might burst. A bold voice thundered through the microphone. Bride wrestler Najma has just defeated the unbeatable Dawood Bibi with a final Barcha Fank move. I looked up at the sky, and my heart was ready to drown in a flood of tears. As I wiped my eyes, I saw the curtain lift and Najma appeared, waist wrapped in a red belt, face streaked with sweat and sand, arms raised high. Her eyes held both water and fire. She ran toward me from afar and placed her victorious cry on my chest. I opened my arms and wrapped her in them. Hands rose like wings over the heads of the audience, whistles sounded, and cries of Allahu Akbar rang out. The same neighborhood women who used to taunt us under the guise of cleaning were now shouting praise. That evening, as we returned home, Nazirin Chachi, who sold soda outside, offered free bottles and said, Daughter-in-law, you have become the crown of our daughters' heads. May Allah keep you safe. Abba took the basket of prayers from her with one hand and squeezed my shoulder with the other. That sand-dusted evening seemed to descend like shimmering moonlight into our courtyard, and it felt as if we had wiped the entire sky clean of the thick dust of prejudice. But under that shower of peace, the fire was not yet out. The very next morning, on my way to work, I heard a commotion. 5 or 6 boys on motorcycles, waving sticks and clubs, charged toward the pit, kicking the door. I couldn't just sit. I ran after them. They burst inside and drew crosses with charcoal over the Quranic verses written on the wall, growling, Stop this filth! Najma sprang up and grabbed one boy's stick. He probably didn't have the courage to face her, but the other 4 picked up speed. Just then, Abba came out, wearing his wrestling belt. Come into the ring if you want to show your bravery, he called out. The boy's hands began to tremble. Before anything else could happen, a police van arrived with sirens blaring. The petty thugs scattered like the wind. After this incident, Abba's old students who had disappeared started to return. They clasped their ears and said, Ustad Ji, we ran away out of fear of broken arms, but today we've come to save our honor from being broken. One of them suggested that an official women's wrestling seminar be held at the city club. That way, the opposition would get a legal, stamped justification, and we could also run a mental training program for the men. I immediately got my shop owner to promise sponsorship. On the night of the seminar, for the first time, we hung a banner across the city's largest community hall that read, Strength of the body is not to rob others of honor, but to elevate it. At the opening ceremony, a well-known female deputy commissioner placed her hand on Najma's arm and said, If my daughter becomes like you one day, I'll be proud. That was the moment I realized we'd moved far beyond a local festival. Now, this was no longer a battle over a handful of sand, but a struggle for the soul of the entire society. But in battles, there are always losses. One evening, as I was closing the shop, 3 hoodlums blocked my path and, with filthy gestures, sneered, How does it feel to become a man by licking your wife's dust? I swallowed my anger, but the next moment, one slapped me across the face. There was no manhood in that slap, only the bite of cowardice. The lessons of wrestling blazed inside me. With a quick move, I grabbed his wrist, swung my leg, and used a wrestler's grip to unbalance him. As he fell, the other 2 stepped back, and just then, a police jeep pulled up. They already had word that some group's boys might come to harass us. They caught the boys on the spot. I was advised to drop the sensitive charges, but I said firmly that I would not withdraw my complaint. The first day in court was full of commotion. The opposing lawyer rained down sarcasm, calling it just a petty scuffle. On the stand, I countered, "This isn't mere assault, it's social terrorism." The judge asked for details, so I explained the whole background. When Najma appeared as a witness, her red wrestling belt sent shockwaves through the opposition chamber. In a loud, clear voice, she said, "If my wrestling is considered obscenity, then what about the words of the prophet? A strong believer is better than a weak one." The judge removed his glasses, looked at her, and paused the file. 2 weeks later, the verdict was announced. The boys were sentenced to